Hey now! What you're about to hear is a free preview of one of this week's episodes of The Dumb Zone. If you would like to hear this episode in full, along with the archive of all of our past episodes, please go to patreon.com/thedumbzone. It's only a hilariously priced $6.90 per month to subscribe. So, Michael Mooney is our guest in here. Don't really need to reset, but I did want to just let people know that you've done lots of other stuff as well. This isn't like your first venture.
No.
And you have some local stuff that we wanted to pick your brain about. One of those things is the South Lake cartel story. Jake and I have been fascinated with that for quite some time. We used to do it on the news every day, and we're even concerned at one point, like, should we be talking about the cartel every day? And
Funny you mentioned that.
yeah.
So it was 2013, May 20th.
That long ago?
The anniversary's coming up.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
Okay.
That a guy in South Lake Town Square was Town Square, the nice development in South Lake. Got some ice cream with his wife, went back to their SUV. Two hitmen came up, shot him 9 or 10 times, left him dying there in his car, left his wife screaming, jumped back in the car, drive away. Turns out that this is a cartel hit, that the guy who was killed was an attorney for the cartel, for Ariel Cardenas, who was a leader of the Gulf Cartel. And so this was this big mystery, like, how did this happen? What exactly happened here? And I started making calls basically that night or the next night. 5 years later, my story eventually came out in Texas Monthly. I think it was called The Cartel Next Door was the headline.
5 years.
That's how long it took.
What'd you end up getting paid? Like for that one story?
Again, another private jet, another.
No, I mean, I'm just wondering, if you put 5 years of work into something, off and on, I'm sure it's not every day for 8 hours a day, but
does
that net you a couple $1,000?
So, yeah, I got paid for the story, but it's also been optioned a couple of times. It was turned into Selena Gomez made a documentary about it for Univision, where I think I get a producer credit. I'm in the documentary too.
Okay, nice.
And so I've gotten some money from that too.
Excellent.
Did you get to meet her?
I did not get to meet her, and I love Selena Gomez too. So I really
who doesn't?
Yeah.
Yeah, some people. Demi Lovato, maybe, I don't know.
I don't care about her.
Yeah, I don't know the exact. She hasn't cut a diss track.
I haven't heard her beef. Yeah. Her diss track.
Yeah. And so, it's not freelance magazine writing is not super easy, right? Almost everybody who does it full-time supplements with consulting and making a life writing is not always easy. But yeah, I got paid. Texas Monthly is a good magazine, pays pretty well.
Okay. And then we also know you wrote about Ron Washington. What is that story?
I did, yeah. That came out in 2011 in D Magazine. I was a staff writer at D Magazine for a long time, but I think that was freelance actually when I did that. And that was after the first World Series run, and not a couple months after his, cocaine admission and that kind of thing. And so
First time
he'd ever used it ever. Just happened to be right before a drug test. So unfortunate. So I loved this guy. Thought he, again, an incredibly compelling character, an amazing story to go from that in the off season to, the World Series. And I grew up a huge Rangers fan. And so I just absolutely love this guy. And I really wanted to do a story about him and figuring out exactly what the angle was going to be or what. And talking with Tim Rogers, the editor of D Magazine, we were like, hey, nobody's ever interviewed him in New Orleans, where he's from. And this wasn't too long after Katrina. And so I asked the Rangers, and they were like, no, absolutely not. He does no interviews in New Orleans. Do not go there. I went anyway, went to his house, knocked on his door. He was not happy to see me. He did not talk to me for a long time. I had also, I was a big fan of Gay Talese, the Esquire writer, magazine godfather of profiles. And he did a really famous story about Joe DiMaggio in the 60s. Joe DiMaggio was retired, and this wasn't too long after Marilyn Monroe died. And so Gay Talese goes to Joe DiMaggio's restaurant in San Francisco. Joe DiMaggio doesn't want to talk to him. Gay Talese then just sits on the curb outside. Joe DiMaggio, being an incredibly nice guy, sees him when he's leaving, and offers him a ride. And so I'm thinking maybe this will happen to me too. And so I knock on Ron Washington's door. I also knocked on all of his neighbors' doors just to say, hey, what's it like living next to Ron Washington? and none of them knew who he was. None of them knew that they lived next to like the manager of a baseball team that had just been in the World Series. And this is in the 9th Ward in New Orleans, which is really close to Lake Pontchartrain. There had been immense flooding. The houses, half the houses were still abandoned. They had X's on them, you know, spray paint. Flooding damage was still really, really obvious. And I also noticed that Ron Washington had a racial slur carved into the sidewalk in front of his house, and he'd owned this house for more than 20 years. He bought it when he was a professional player. He didn't want to talk about any of those things. So when he politely-ish declined talking to me, I sat on the curb across from his house and kind of hoped that maybe he would see me and drive me back to my hotel or whatever. And he did see me. He came out, and I think he was washing his car. And I heard him
washes his own car in the driveway.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah. In like a nice, you know, it's not a mansion, right? It was like probably a 3-2 on the corner. Like,
well, let me tell you something. The reason I am fascinated by this story is that I read it at the time, and the story was like, this is not, like you said, it's not a mansion. In fact, it's not even like that nice of a suburban home.
No,
it's a downtrodden area, and so we went to the New Orleans Super Bowl a couple years after that, and we went to that house. We had to see it.
Was the racial slur still there?
I don't know, but I know there's one more now.
He etched it back.
I was going to say,
Good Lord, that's great. Yeah. So he eventually did see me, and instead of coming out and offering me a ride, I did hear him go inside and call the Rangers media guys, and so I could hear him on the phone being like, "He's actually outside right now." And my phone starts ringing immediately, and it's the Rangers guys who were very,
John Blake?
Yes.
Not happy with you?
Very angry. And then he calls Tim Rogers, and just a lot of people being very, very angry.
Yeah, the sitting outside a restaurant is one thing. There's lots of people coming in and out. Just sitting in. I've been to that neighborhood. No one's outside.
I was
there.
naive. Yeah. And honestly, it was probably not
looks
the
really
safest,
stalkerish, weird. Yeah,
not the safest decision to just park myself on the sidewalk there either.
No, it wasn't it wasn't an area where you're like, yeah, this is fine. This is great. I'm sure they'll like a guy that looks like me is going to be fine here.
Yeah.
You wouldn't welcome a guy that looks like him just sitting outside your house?
I would think
the
that's
9th
very
Ward.
odd.
Yeah, just looking in the abandoned houses, just knocking on random
What's the
doors.
app that wives would put you on now?
Next door.
Next door.
Yeah.
You would have been,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think there were a lot of people in that neighborhood on the next door app, but
No.
But yeah,
at that point.
yeah, in a different neighborhood, that's exactly what would have happened, and yeah, the cops would have been there very, very quickly.
So that was a good story, man. That
Thank
was
you.
very interesting.
Yeah, he did not love the story because I think he just really felt like it was an invasion of privacy in a way I really didn't want it.
And
That,
yeah,
you know.
in a way, he's got a point.
But but it also, you know, it was just a view of him that nobody else that had just not been seen at the time, and again, an incredibly compelling character that we had to cut a substantial amount out of that story just because there were so many great lines that he had just said over the years.
Mm-hmm. You know, I'm wondering about this. This is from the podcast too. You're just talking about the change in alt weeklies and how it was a very renegade place, and they would report on anything. Nothing was off limits. They couldn't bow down to a sponsor who complained that they were going to pull their advertising because they had so much else. But as time shifted, and as there was possible, protest at the sponsors now, you did get a story pulled.
I did.
And I wonder if that's ever happened anywhere else, too. You were, in on the very early days of the opioid crisis.
Yeah. Before that term had even been used.
Like pill mills, whatever they call it.
Yeah, where I lived in South Florida was basically like the Columbia of prescription drugs, right?
And now everybody's like, oh, yeah, of course. That's
right.
And
Right.
there's documentary after documentary about that.
Right. People have won Pulitzers on those stories. And this was super early on in that. And they were just everywhere. And so I just and I was already in touch with sheriffs and counselors in places like Kentucky and Ohio.
Was it like you found more pill outlets than Starbucks, something like that?
More pill mills than McDonald's.
Than McDonald's.
In Broward County alone, which is where Fort Lauderdale is. And I knew that because a politician said that during a debate. There's more pill mills than McDonald's, and that seemed like insane because there were a lot of McDonald's. There were 70.
And you thought that's just a politician blowing hot air?
Yeah, and it takes a while to count, unless
turns out it's true.
It was true.
Yeah.
It was more than 100 pill mills, and it was probably 70-something McDonald's in this county, which is a lot of McDonald's. There's probably a highest concentration of McDonald's outside of New York. And so, I worked on the story for a long time and was in touch with families who had people die from addiction and sheriffs who had jails and morgues filled with people who had just ruined their lives on these drugs, all coming from South Florida. And at some point, I was told the story was killed. And I was never given an exact reason why, which was very frustrating and honestly kind of the beginning of the end of my time there. But it was also obvious a little bit what was happening because the last 10 pages of our newspaper were just pill mill ads and very explicit pill mill ads, right? Saying, come here for opiates.
And this is like when advertising was starting to go down, right? Like,
Right.
So like,
This was the pressure.
these were like the last
They needed
few spots.
Right.
Yeah.
The business
Whatever.
model was really beginning to be tested nationally. They had a big feud with Craigslist and kind of celebrated when Craigslist ended their adult ads. And their editorial strategy nationwide was kind of shifting a little bit. And Mike Lacey and Jim Larkin were also battling Joe Arpaio in Arizona and all of these boycott threats across the country. And so things were really beginning to change. And I don't think I noticed that as a reporter until then, right? Because the business side had been kept so separate from what we were doing. We were just told over and over again, just never worry about an ad. There's no sacred cows, nothing like that. And then,
Turns out to be the
the
sleaziest place you could
yeah.
worry about. You have to worry about.
And these were really fascinating places that were just wreaking devastation across the country and changing our country forever.
Jake,
Dan.
I just can't stop thinking of just how awesome your voice is. God damn, I wish my voice was yours.
Thank you. So I was so worried about because so many people have great podcast voices. You guys have great voices. So many have
Thank you.
that NPR voice. Yeah.
No, I think you could sweet talk me with that voice. It's very sexy. No, Jake used to have an agent who represented Vanilla Ice at one point. And I understand you have some connection with Vanilla Ice.
I do. I have a lot of connections with Vanilla Ice.
What does that mean?
So I knew Vanilla Ice when I was like 5. He raced motocross here, and my family was a motocross family. My cousin was a big.
How old are you?
43.
Okay.
And so there's some picture of me somewhere in the back of or next to Vanilla Ice's IROC, or like one of his. I think he was driving an IROC at the time, and he was not known as Vanilla Ice. He was just known as Rob.
Robbie
Rob
Van
Van
Winkle.
Winkle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then when I was in Miami, he lived there, and it was kind of one of the lowest points of his life. It was before his reality show and all that, and he was just beginning to.
So after he was Vanilla Ice.
After
now
he
he's
was Vanilla
fallen.
Ice, probably 10 years after he had kind of tried to kill himself, and
After Suge Knight.
yeah, after Suge Knight shook him down for some money, and then.
Oh wait, is that the hanging him over the balcony story?
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, he later said he was not hung over a balcony, but he was strong-armed into giving Suge Knight a substantial amount of Ice Ice Baby money.
It's kind of funny though. You can really only kind of try to kill yourself.
Yeah.
You either do it
It's
Yeah,
like
or you kind of tried.
or
Yeah.
you kind of try.
Yeah.
yeah, I think he tried and then woke up. So
Yeah.
so I hung out with Rob Van Winkle for a couple of days in South Florida and wrote a story about how he just basically was kind of owning his identity at that point. And we actually met when I was with him, we met the Sugar Hill Gang. And so
Why not?
He was like, yeah, exactly, as one does. And then and Rob, was basically like he'd been identified by Ice Ice Baby, which he wrote when he was like 16 or 17 years old. And this had just defined his life and become a joke. It was super popular, a lot of money, and then
Sure.
became a big joke and mocked and destroyed on MTV and all sorts of lines and
As it were.
Now he's touring with Christopher Kid Reed.
yeah.
Are they on some kind of
Yeah.
Like
90s?
Totally,
90s thing,
totally
yeah.
90s
Yeah.
tour or something like that.
I mean, I bet those concerts are a lot of fun there. So we met the Sugar Hill Gang, and they were like, yeah, one song. It's still great. Like we play it all the time. People love it. Like we are able to transport people back into their youths, have great times. And I went to I went to 2 of his concerts actually. And, it was like some 35-year-old asses shaking all over the place.
Jake's dream.
Fantastic.
Was there a court case with him and David Bowie over the
Queen.
Yeah, I don't know if it,
Queen?
Yeah.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, no, it was Queen and David Bowie. That's who did that song. And he had the famous line where it was on
It's
MTV.
dun,
or-
dun, 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 dun,
Dun,
dun.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when I was with him, people would come up and ask him about that all the time. And he was like, yeah, I was wrong. And he ended up giving David Bowie and Queen a large amount of Ice Ice Baby money as well. This is how much Ice Ice Baby made, by the way, that he was able to give Suge Knight some and Queen and David Bowie and just spread that Ice Ice Baby money around and never ran out of money, right? He still, he was never broke. He still lived in a very nice place in Palm Beach.
I watched that clip 1,000 times and was like, I'm missing something.
Right.
Every single time. He's like, so ours was done, 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 done. And theirs was done, 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 done.
Yeah. Totally different.
And I'm like,
Totally different.
Two totally
songs.
different.
you're literally saying the exact same thing.
Yeah. But I mean, imagine how it affects your brain and your development if something you did when you were 16 becomes like a national crazy phenomenon that they could, like Walmart could not bring enough of these tapes in because they would sell out immediately. And so there were big trucks of these things.
I absolutely bought it.
For 9 months, of course.
Then he had that ninja rap money afterwards, man.
Go Ninja, go Ninja, go.
Great song.
That TMNT 2 money.
Yeah.
What is your connection with Mitch Hedberg? If we're doing the life and times of
Scattershooting.
Michael
Yeah, I
Mooney?
love this. Is a little bit of a this is your life through stories, which I actually these are all you've all picked the stories that you've picked the stories I like a lot, so that works out well. I love Mitch Hedberg, probably the greatest comedian in my mind of all time, or way up there. And I was obsessed with him, and actually saw him in Austin while we were hanging out occasionally.
You're saying funnier than Rita Rudner?
Yeah, that's tough.
Well, we'll think about it.
What about Sinbad, though? Let's not forget Sinbad and all
What
this.
about Sinbad?
Yeah, I mean, not funnier than Necessary Roughness, Sinbad, but but just and especially when I was in college, like Mitch Hedberg lines as
That's all
he did to an enormous amount of people.
We communicated via Mitch Hedberg quotes.
Yeah, just constantly, right? And those like that type of humor was just amazing, right? Because it wasn't just clever and cutesy; it was like he spoke in the way our brains worked in a lot of ways. And so, so I loved him. Was obsessed with him. When he died, 2005, I was just kind of beginning to realize I really wanted to write in magazines. A couple of years later, I reached out to his widow, and I'd heard that he had all of these notebooks. And so I talked to her, and she invited me out to their cabin in Big Bear, California, and we went through his notebooks for days.
What proof that sometimes you just have to ask?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Like you actually got
And just
invited to look through these notebooks.
and I'm sure,
And you're just some guy.
I'm sure that people had asked.
You weren't working anywhere huge paper or anything?
I was doing it for GQ, so like not nowhere.
Okay, that was a little bit. That's a nice word to
Yeah. And I'm sure that people had asked before, and it was some part timing where she was just ready at the moment I asked, and you know, and so it was incredible, right? These notebooks you could see the evolution of his jokes. You could see like little things he had drawn in there, and it's just you could see into his mind in a little bit. It was just a fascinating world, and you got to see like where he lived in this like outside of LA in the mountains, and also the damage that his death and his life had done to this woman. Lynn, his widow, was kind of like permanently, traumatized by this, obviously. And it was amazing. And at the end, she gave me a pair of his sunglasses. So he would often wear sunglasses on stage, and this was kind of like part of his personality. Yeah. And so at the end, she was like, would you like a pair of these? And I realized what she was handing me. And of course, there was also like a cheese grater over there, like in the cabin. And I was like, hey, that's a sponge ruiner. And she's like, yeah, no, I've heard of all of his jokes. But yeah, so I mean, it was just, and I'm still in touch with her. And I wrote about it in GQ, these notebooks that he had, and I still want to write more about it and go out there more. I think that there's more I would like to do on that. Mitch Hedberg's just an amazing character.
Do you wear the shades?
No, I never did. And in fact, actually, my wife, I have like a box of kind of things that I've collected through journalism through the years. And they were in there, and I had an upstairs office when we lived in Oak Cliff. And I just walked up there one time, and she was just wearing the sunglasses. And I was like, do you know what those are? And she's like, sunglasses. I was like, do you know who the last person to wear those sunglasses? And she like immediately took them off. She's like, oh my God, these are Mitch Hedberg sunglasses, aren't they? I was like, yeah. So now Mitch Hedberg was not the last person to wear them, but I don't think I ever wore them.
Never wore them.
I don't know if that would feel right. Maybe I did at some point when I was not sober, but but I don't think I did, because there's some reverence to them, right?
Yeah. She never asked you to wear them while conceiving or making a baby or anything?
If she did, I would never tell anybody.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
She knows that.
I thought I have to ask, right? In journalism, you just have to ask.
Full circle back to the missionary discussion. Really.
Yeah.
That absolutely. That's what we were doing here.
Mhm.
All right, man. Well, this is great. I really enjoyed the podcast. We want everybody to download it and buy Audible and do stuff like that? And
Thank you very much.
does that line your pockets, or you already got paid? You don't really care.
I mean, it certainly helps. We'd like to do another podcast.
Yeah.
For Audible at some point.
There's so many podcasts within that podcast too, like the stories that were in there. So I was telling them, and they need to just go and deep dive into all of those.
Yeah, spin-off. And we'd obviously like the podcast to be turned into a scripted series and documentary at some point too.
It kind of seems like, yes, if you're saying podcast within a podcast, just stories that you've dealt with in the alt weeklies.
Yeah.
The whole the story of the baby man is one that jumps to mind. That in the podcast, Blake, it was.
What do you think of when you hear the word baby man?
I was just trying to picture what.
A guy who wanted to, I wonder if that's where you ever see the Tim and Eric be a baby sketch. I wonder if that kind of came from that.
It was a thing. There's a lot of adults who a fetish is that they live as babies. So this guy
wore a diaper,
curled his hair, used a pacifier, slept in an adult-sized crib, ate baby food, hired women to come over and mommy him.
Yep. Change his diaper. He trained himself to be incontinent by chaining his toilet closed. And in the alt weekly world,
chaining his toilet closed.
Yeah, padlocking his toilet. And in the alt weekly world, that story was like legendary, right? Because this is the kind of amazing character that you're looking for, because stories like that illuminate parts of society
that
nobody would otherwise see, right?
Now, would that be a guy at a bar having a drink, though?
A baby? What do you mean?
But did Baby Man go out?
He did, yeah. He would. He met the reporter, actually, who did that story. He met him at a bar. Baby Man walks up, of course, orders a bottle of beer. And the guy walks by and says...
Does he put the nipple on the top of the beer?
I wanted to know so bad.
Oh.
And the guy walks, and a drunk walks by, and it's like, ooh, what's that smell? And Baby Man turns around, and he's like, that's diaper powder. You like it? And the guy walks away. Exactly. You made the right face. That's right. And the guy walks away, and Baby Man's like, he didn't want to fight me. I know karate.
That's why he didn't want to fight you.
Yeah.
Also addicted to crack, by the way.
Yeah. As the reporter said,
babies will.
Sometimes they
yeah. And it turns out he was like a millionaire. He had a lot of family money.
He was the heir of the Popular Mechanics.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
He'd had enough money to afford him this baby lifestyle. And the journalist who did that, of course, was going through his own, and Baby Man was addicted to crack. He just needed love and crack. The journalist who did that story was also going through a lot of stuff in his own life. So around the time that he was reporting that story, he was also robbing businesses because he was a gambling addict. So he was
stick up man.
Yeah, he like 11 or 12 businesses, many of them salons. So he was nicknamed the Salon Bandit. And was arrested at a poker table. I think he'd gone through $60,000 or something like that, and ended up spending 9 or 10 years in prison. And he was
at Joe Arpaio's prison.
In Joe Arpaio's jail. That's where he started. Yeah.
Full circle.
All full circle.
They all fit together, which was incredibly difficult to arrange all of these things historically. So knowing this podcast was coming 20 years ago was really, really difficult too.